Hello everyone. My topic in the program is safety and toxicity of e-cigarettes. Then everyone complains that I'm never finishing on time. For this year, I'm going to use just 10 extra minutes. I'm joking. So, one of the major characteristics of e-cigarettes is media frenzy. You all know it. I don't know if there are journalists also here. They're pretty aware of it. E-cigarettes, same toxicity as tobacco cigarettes, high concentrations of formaldehyde. This media frenzy is in reality science frenzy, because it's the scientists who create these media horror stories, mainly for no reason. Everyone is familiar with this study, published in one of the most respected journals, which makes it very hard for us to criticize the journal due to its scientific integrity. And you all know, I will show it again, that this comparison between cigarettes and tobacco cigarettes was comparing formaldehyde with formaldehyde hemiacetal, comparing standard deviation with standard error of mean. I mean, these are basic reasons to reject the research letter. And, of course, if they wanted to measure standard deviation, that would have been the standard deviation. That's true. When we replicated the study, but with another atomizer, that's true, and we published the results, everywhere the results were extremely good, except from the cases where you were burning coal. And of course, no user is ever exposed to such levels in the same way that no user is going to eat this piece of charcoal. But we went 2 steps further since then. One is, okay, there is formaldehyde there. What does formaldehyde mean? And let's see what are the other sources of exposure to formaldehyde. And it was quite interesting because we found that with this cigarette you are getting exposed to less formaldehyde compared to just staying at home and breathing the air inside your house. And the reason is that the WHO, although formaldehyde is extremely toxic, carcinogenic, and so on, but the WHO has acceptable levels of formaldehyde present in clean indoor air. These are the upper limit for clean indoor air. You get 3 times more formaldehyde when you just stay at home for 24 hours compared to using 600 puffs from the device that we tested and we measured formaldehyde in the previous slide. And then we went a step further. A direct replication of the study performed in New England Journal of Medicine. Same atomizer, CE4. I'm sure no one is using CE4 now. The last time I saw a CE4 was 2 or 3 years ago. It took me 1 month to find a CE4 atomizer in the market. Not in Greece, it was impossible. Not even as a leftover in some warehouse or anything. So we found CE4 atomizers, top coil. We found an inokinite taste V3.0 battery. Of course, we found the liquid used in that study. So, of course, these things were not mentioned in the letter, but I got this information from the author himself by emailing him. But what we did differently compared to the letter, we recruited vapers, and we asked them to report at which voltage, which is another stupidity because you should never report voltage but wattage. But we had to report voltage because that's what the original study reported. We asked them to report at which voltage levels they detected dry puffs. So we asked them to take 10 puffs of 4-second duration. Let me remind you that the paper mentioned, the research letter mentioned 4 to 5 seconds. Probably they activated the device in the lab by hand. That's why they couldn't mention the exact puff duration. 4 seconds puff duration, 30 seconds in the puff interval, at different voltage settings with the participants being blinded to the voltage settings, so they didn't know what they were testing at the time they were given the device. They were asked to report when they would stop using the device due to dry puff detection, and we tested difference of 0.2 volts, which are extremely low. It's the lowest, basically, change in the setup that you can do with this device. We measured aldehyde levels subsequently in the lab, but we differentiated realistic with dry puff conditions. We had 26 vapers participating. It was really amazing that 88% identified dry puffs at 4 to 4.2 volts, and we had 3 outliers at 4.4 volts. So, as you know, there are some reports which say that the higher the wattage setting or the voltage setting, the more the aldehydes, and there is a linear association, and so on and so on. And of course, this does not exist when you measure realistic versus dry puff conditions. And here are the results. First of all, you see that you cannot compare puffs of different power settings, because the liquid consumption per puff or per 50 puffs in this case is hugely different. Of course, in this case, between 4 and 4.2, there is absolutely no difference. It's a very small margin. But look how much liquid was consumed at 3.3 volts, and it's about 4 times more, 3 times more at 5 volts. So the puffs made at 3.3 volts are completely different compared to the puffs at 5 volts. Formaldehyde and acetaldehyde. You can see that during normal puffing conditions, and we used 2 setups, as I said, we identified dry puffs at 4.2 volts for 88% of participants. So we said that 4 volts is the upper limit, voltage limit, at which vapers can use the device normally. These are associated with normal vaping conditions and non-dry puff. Above that, it was dry puff. So 3.3 and 4 volts, you can see that we found the same level of formaldehyde, almost the same. But look how it changes once you start detecting dry puffs, and look what happens when you go to 5 volts, which I must say I never even dared suggest to any vapor to take a single puff at 5 volts. It was really horrible even at 4.4 or 4.2. Acetaldehyde, the same. There is basically a stable aldehyde production at normal vaping conditions, and a sudden and severe increase, very steep increase in aldehyde levels when you get into the dry puff zone, let's say. Acrolein, the same thing. I mean, even if I ordered the numbers, I wouldn't have got better numbers than that. Acetone, the same thing. But it is important, and it's something that we have not seen in the literature until now, not to report the number of, the amount of aldehydes per puff. Because first of all, no vapor measures the number of puffs they take every day. They measure the liquid they consume. Secondly, because as I showed in the first slide related to this study, the liquid consumption per puff varies greatly as you change the voltage or the power setting. So we made the calculation per liquid consumption, per gram. And look what happens. This in reality shows the thermal degradation rate, because it's amount of formaldehyde per liquid consumption. So what you see is whether you have an increase and at what point you have an increase in thermal degradation rate. And you see the critical point is basically the level where dry puffs were detected. So until 4 volts, where we had 90% almost of the vapors using it normally, you see that there is no elevation in the thermal degradation rate. It's basically a straight line. Above 4 volts, you see a sudden and very steep increase. At 5 volts, it's a complete disaster. The same with everything. I mean, as I said, it's more than a dream, better than a dream. This is exactly what Peyton and Paco didn't say. They said that there is a, and especially when we sent the letter asking for a retraction with Clive, I don't know if Clive is here, they said that there is a linear association between voltage and aldehyde emissions. And of course, when you are taking 2 measurements, there is only one straight line that can connect the 2 points. But when you take some measurements in between, as you can see, it's highly likely that you don't have a straight line. And this is exactly what we did. So the study must be retracted, or at least we're going to submit this paper to New England Journal of Medicine. I can guarantee they will reject it, but we'll just lose the time sending it there. Coming now to some newer studies that maybe some of you have seen in the media, they have circulated already. This is another research letter. It's the first time that we're seeing press statements about research letters. It's really amazing. It's coming from the University of Athens, where they measured aortic stiffness and blood pressure. They said something amazing, that e-cigarette use increases blood pressure acutely. Of course, nicotine increases blood pressure. We know that for about half a century. But they also found that it increases aortic stiffness by comparing, of course, e-cigarette use for 30 minutes with smoking one tobacco cigarette. Because the comparison with using the e-cigarette for 5 minutes was much less. But they measured the acute effect, so before and just after use. And they concluded that because aortic stiffness has a prognostic value in future development of cardiovascular events, and because of the prolonged use of e-cigarette among users, they basically say that this has a prognostic significance, showing that there is increased risk for cardiovascular events due to e-cigarette use. But it's interesting because when you look at the guidelines for measuring aortic stiffness, one of the main criteria is that you should refrain from smoking for 3 hours. Basically, you have to refrain from any stimulant, including caffeine, they say especially caffeine, alcohol also. So basically, what they measured was the effects of nicotine intake. And of course, they found more with the use of the e-cigarette for 30 minutes because obviously the users absorbed more nicotine. And basically what they did was violate the basic principle of measurements and the basic criterion for measuring aortic stiffness, which substantially then is a prognostic indicator. The second problem is that it's never the acute effect of intervention was never found to be a prognostic indicator of any kind of diseases. It's the measurement of aortic stiffness at baseline resting conditions without smoking, eating, or drinking coffee for 3 hours, etc., that has any prognostic significance, not the acute effect of an intervention like smoking or e-cigarette use. And we know that because these are exactly the same effects that have been observed in the past for caffeine, exactly the same increase in aortic stiffness, just by drinking coffee, more delayed here because there is some time until from the time you drink coffee until the time you absorb caffeine. Exactly the same effects of getting nicotine orally, that was a tablet that was given, and despite the very low absorption rate in oral intake, still they had worse effects. But what is very interesting that although oral nicotine intake has the same effects acutely on aortic stiffness, on the long term, quitting smoking with the use of NRTs is beneficial for aortic stiffness. So when you measure at baseline resting conditions, people who have quit smoking with the use of nicotine, you see that there is a significant improvement starting 1 month and becoming even better 2 months, just 2 months after quitting smoking. These are studies showing this thing before that one was published. These are studies that we should look for. This is one from Ricardo Poloza, I suppose he's here, and he followed up asthmatics, not acutely 5 minutes after an intervention, for 1 year. I don't know what's happening. I'm not touching anything. Okay, probably it got scared. 1 year after the intervention, so they had 2 baseline measurements. They switched at the second measurement to e-cigarettes. Not all of them managed to quit smoking, so there were both dual users and exclusive e-cigarette users. First follow-up visit, 6 months. There was a trend to improve, but not statistically significant. Second follow-up visit, a statistically significant increase. And third follow-up visit, 2 years later, a maintenance of the improvement in the asthmatic condition. That's a spirometry measurement, so it's an objective improvement in asthma condition. It's not subjective. Evidence of harm reversal, a significant improvement which is maintained even after 2 years of follow-up. Recently, a few months ago, we published a study of a follow-up for 52 weeks of smokers who switched. These are subjects from the ECLAT study, again by Ricardo, and we found that especially for quitters, but also for reducers who have reduced more than 50% their smoking consumption, there was a statistically significant reduction and independent of other covariates in blood pressure. And so there was improvement after 1 year of follow-up, 1 year of follow-up. I will remind you about the risks of nicotine because there are some new discussions about cancerogenicity of nicotine and cardiovascular disease. and major misconceptions among even healthcare professionals. And I'm going to show you a study published by Lars Armstrong, I think he's somewhere in the audience, who has showed that despite the high overall tobacco and nicotine use in Sweden among men, this use is mostly snus and much lower, in much lower proportion smoking tobacco cigarettes. And as a result, Sweden has by far the lowest death rates from cancer and cardiovascular disease compared to any other country in the EU. So we have a proof of concept for many years, not a recent one, that harm reduction really works on a population level. As a conclusion, you see I was really fast this year. Current estimates, I have 3 more slides. Current estimates by Public Health England and the Royal College of Physicians suggest that e-cigarettes are 95% less harmful. I've never seen a study disputing that until now, until today. This is due to the huge differences in liquid and e-cigarette aerosol chemistry compared to tobacco smoke chemistry, either total absence of many toxins or presence at extremely low levels. And of course, that was something we could expect easily because there is no combustion. However, there is strong opposition to tobacco harm reduction, either due to ideological opposition to nicotine, which I can accept, and I don't ever advise anyone to use nicotine, but I think the duty of healthcare professionals, clinicians, and public health is to care about disease and death, and not about addiction even to nicotine. And the concerns that we very frequently hear about the use in by non-smokers or by youth, they are legitimate. We need to monitor the situation, but they don't exist in reality. So I think that using these arguments to apply restrictions is an abuse of the precautionary principle. So I wonder whether it is our duty to help smokers unwilling or unable to quit with other methods, or to punish them because they don't use the methods we want them to use to quit smoking. That's really the question. Of course, long-term evidence, everyone discusses. We don't know what's happening after 20, 30, 40 years. Of course, it's definitely needed, but we should avoid what I call the parachute phenomenon, and it's going to be a nice joke what the parachute phenomenon is. This is a study published in BMJ in 2003, and they wanted to make a review of the literature of studies showing that parachute use prevents death and trauma from gravitational challenge, from falling from heights. Yeah? So it was published in 2003 in British Medical Journal. The authors found none. So they said, as with many other interventions to prevent ill health, the effectiveness of a parachute has not been subjected to rigorous peer review and randomized controlled trial evaluation. So he said that all these advocates of evidence-based medicine, they suggested, the authors, to participate in a double-blind, randomized, crossover, placebo-controlled trial, falling with a parachute and falling with something else, not a parachute, and see if it's successful or not. That's exactly what's happening with e-cigarettes now. We deny seeing the evidence because we don't have the gold standard, which is not even a gold standard for e-cigarettes or for any other behavioral intervention. But in medicine, the gold standard is considered randomized controlled trials. And I will finish with a case report. This is a very nice guy, and I have a written consent to present his picture and his data. I'm not going to present his name. I met him a couple of months ago on the streets in Athens. He's holding his e-cigarette. 60-year-old, 62, retired mechanic in commercial ships traveling all over the world. Smoker since the age of 16, 3 to 4 packs a day. He was diagnosed with COPD in 2001. He continued to smoke at the same rate. He was diagnosed with laryngeal cancer in 2011. He underwent surgery and radiotherapy. He was smoking during the first month after surgery 3 cigarettes per day, and after the first month, 3 to 4 packs per day again. He tried the cigarettes 3 years ago, a second-generation device. He told me they were completely unsatisfactory. He had severe cravings for smoking. He immediately abandoned them. He failed to quit. He kept on smoking 3 to 4 packs a day. He had a severe COPD crisis in 2016 in January, this year. He was admitted to a university respiratory hospital. Basically, he was expelled from the hospital because he was smoking inside. But he was discharged with oxygen therapy for 18 hours per day. For the next week, he couldn't get out of his house. He said that he had even dyspnea going to the restroom or whatever. So after 1 week, he bought a third-generation device, an e-cigarette. He managed to quit smoking on day 1. He quit oxygen therapy on week 1. Today, he's riding his scooter. He's building his own coils. And he convinced his son and some other relatives to quit smoking using e-cigarettes. And I saw him on the streets 2 months ago. So this guy, should he have waited for long-term studies before trying e-cigarettes? What do you think? Thank you very much.